Hello and welcome back in, everybody. Today I got a brand new deck tech here. Looks like we're playing around in Rakdos today with a little bit of a Voltron commander. The one we're talking about today is the Balrog, Durin's Bane. It's 5, a black and a red for a 7/5 avatar demon. It's an expensive commander, however it says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each permanent sacrificed this turn. Keep in mind that this counts your opponents and yourself. We'll get into that a little bit later. It has haste, and it says the Balrog, Durin's Bane can't be blocked except by legendary creatures. Also, when the Balrog dies, destroy target artifact or creature an opponent controls. So there's a lot of stuff on this commander that really leans into us having a big, scary Voltron-y commander. You know, it can be cast for cheap by sacrificing some permanents. It has haste, so it can attack right away. It can't be blocked except by primarily your opponent's commanders. Most of the time, they're not going to want to do that. And if they manage to kill it, you're taking something down with it. So this is a prime candidate for a really strong, fun Rakdos Voltron commander. So obviously, we're going to have to pay attention to that first part first. You know, we're going to need to have some permanents be sacrificed, whether it be our own or our opponents. So we'll go into some ways that we can sacrifice permanents first. There's some tokens here we could be making that'll make it a little bit easier for us to cast our commander. First up, we got Visions of Ruin. It's 3 and a red for a sorcery. It says each opponent sacrifices an artifact, and for each artifact sacrificed this way, you create a treasure token. It also has flashback for 8 red, so this spell costs X less to cast this way, where X is the greatest mana value of a commander you own on the battlefield or in the command zone. So the flashback on this is even cheaper than the regular cost, being only 3 with our commander being 7 mana, so it brings that down to 1 red. This works double duty for our commander's ability. If our opponents each have an artifact, that's going to reduce the cost immediately by 3, and then we get 3 more treasure tokens, which then we only have to crack a couple more, which will give us the mana to reduce it and cast it. This is an absolute slam dunk in the deck, especially because you can cast it more than once with that flashback. Next up here, I got Urbrask's Forge. It's 2 and a red for an artifact. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put an oil counter on Urbrask's Forge and create an X1 red Phyrexian Horror creature token with trample and haste, where X is the number of oil counters on Urbrask's Forge. Sack that token at the beginning of the end step. So this and a few other cards in the deck are just spitting out tokens every turn that we can use to cast our commander. This one's nice because it could act as a little bit of a backup, not completely, but if it gets pretty late in the game and we're spitting out, you know, a 5, 6, 7, 1 trample haste token, that can still put in some work, which is what we're trying to do, and just whittle our opponents down to 0 life. Speaking of pinging our opponents, we got Pain Distributor, 2 and a red for a 2/3 Devil Citizen with Menace. This is whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, they create a treasure token. That also benefits us because we get the treasures to then sacrifice for our commander's cost reduction. Also, it says whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put to the graveyard from the battlefield, Pain Distributor deals 1 damage to that player. So it gives them a little bit of treasure and then hurts them for using it. Also, if they're using any sort of other treasures, clues, foods, now especially in this set particularly, there's lots of foods, so it could be pretty useful. Another cheap one here, we got Impulsive Pilferer, 1 mana for a 1/1 Goblin Pirate. It says when Impulsive Pilferer dies, create a treasure token, and it has Encore 3 and a red, which means you exile this from your graveyard and then create a token for each opponent you have. You can sacrifice all of those on the end step and then sacrifice the treasures, and just with this 1 card, you could get your commander out for pretty cheap. Another cheap one here, we got Descent into Avernus, 2 and a red enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 Descent counters on Descent into Avernus, then each player creates X treasure tokens, and Descent into Avernus deals X damage to each player, where X is the number of Descent counters on Descent into Avernus. If anybody's seen this one in a game, it absolutely throws the game for a loop. You know, everybody's creating tons of treasures, that's extra mana, they're taking tons of damage. That just brings us closer to our end goal, which is obviously reducing our opponent's life to 0. Another way we can get some treasures is with Forge, Neverwinter Charlatan. It's 3 and a black for a 2/4 human rogue with Menace, and it has Ward, sacrifice a creature, which then also plays into our commander's ability, because if they want to target this, you're gonna have to sacrifice something. Also, it says Forge Neverwinter Charlatan gets +2/+0 for each treasure you control. Could come in handy, most likely not. Also, whenever one or more players sacrifice one or more creatures, you create a tapped treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. So if they pay the ward to sacrifice a creature to target this, they're also going to be sacrificing a creature, which gives us a treasure token, and that will help our commander get out quicker. So that's what this whole category is about, is just helping our commander get out a little bit quicker. Some other ways we can do that here is having our opponents sacrifice their creatures. So stuff like Innocent Blood, it's a 1 mana sorcery, 1 black. It says each player sacrifices a creature, including you. So you're going to have some fodder out, but you're in a 4-player game, 1 mana, and that reduces your commander's cost by 4, bringing it down to just 3 mana. Pretty strong this one is. And then we got a bunch of the creature ones in the deck, such as Plague Crafter, 2 and a black for a 3/2 human shaman. When Plague Crafter enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Each player who can't discards a card. So even if they don't have the creatures to sacrifice, it will still get value, this one, by having your opponents discard cards, and that's just good on its own. And then obviously we're going to need some ways ways to sacrifice those tokens we had earlier. So one of those ways is with Goblin Bombardment. It's 1 and a red for an enchantment. Sacrifice a creature. Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to any target. This helps us ping down our opponents' creatures, planeswalkers, whatever, while also sacrificing our own creatures to help reduce the cost of our commander. And then also some payoffs for sacrificing permanents. We got Durin, Master of the Review, black and a red for a 1/1 human shaman. It says whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Durin, Master of the Review. When Durin dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Again, pretty similar to Goblin Bombardment. You just get this guy's power up really high, sacrifice it, deal a bunch of damage. Seems like a great card for only 2 mana. Next up, we'll go into some of the card draw here. First up, we got Inspired Tinkering, 4 and a red for a sorcery. It says exile the top 3 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. Also create 3 treasure tokens. So notably with this one, it creates 3 treasure tokens, which we can sacrifice to reduce our commander's cost by 3, and that also adds 3 mana, so we only need 1 mana after this one to cast our commander with just Inspired Tinkering. Also, being able to play the top 3 cards of your library until your next turn is pretty good card draw in Rakdos, because we don't have too many options for that, other than ones that care about us sacrificing things. Other card draw spells that grant us treasure are really useful in this deck, such as Unexpected Windfall. It's 2 red for an instant. It says as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, you draw 2 cards, and then you create 2 treasure tokens. I think we all know by now how good treasures are in this deck. All right, and then once we do all that, once we get our commander out and online, what are we gonna do? Obviously, this is a Voltron deck, so we're gonna need to get in for commander damage, so we're gonna need to buff up our commander. Some interesting ways to do that. We got here Unleash Fury, 1 and a red for an instant, double the power of target creature until end of turn, bringing our commander up to 14 power. That is a pretty scary number. However, if we have that in addition to, say, Teamer Battle Rage, 1 and a red for an instant, target creature gains double strike until end of turn, and that creature also gains trample until end of turn if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. That turns our commander into a 14/5 with double strike, trample, haste, and can't be blocked except by legendary creatures. That is a pretty easy one-shot for just 4 mana with these 2 cards. Another way we can get that one-shot off is with Jeska Thrice Reborn. It's 2 and a red for a 0 loyalty planeswalker. Its passive is Jeska Thrice Reborn enters the battlefield with a loyalty counter on it for each time you've cast a commander from the command zone this game. Notably, we do have a potentially cheap commander, so this could come in with several loyalties depending on how long the game has gone on and how many times we've cast our commander. First one is 0, choose target creature until your next turn. If that creature would deal combat damage to one of your opponents, it deals triple that damage to that player instead. Again, bringing us up to that 21 exactly, which will one-shot anybody that doesn't have a blocker. Also has a -X, which we probably won't be using too often. It says Jeska Thrice Reborn. It deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. I don't really see this one coming in handy too often, mainly using it for that triple damage boost. Got another fun one here. We got Conqueror's Flail, 2 mana for equipment. It says equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control. Gives it a nice little +2/+2, not too shabby. However, it also says as long as Conqueror's Flail is attached to a creature, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. Equipped 2. So again, with that Unleash Fury, Teamer Battle Rage play, we're not going to want our opponents to be able to do anything on our turns, and if we have Conqueror's Flail already attached to the Balrog, and then say the next turn we go off on it, that's just going to help us close out the game. And I could talk about some of the lands and ramp options, but basically just look for lands that sacrifice themselves and look for ramp options that sacrifice themselves to either give you mana or go fetch basics or whatever it would be. So I'm just going to skip over those and go straight into the last category, which we all know is utility, just the basic good stuff that makes the deck work a little bit smoother. First up here, I got Kazul's Fury. It's 2 and a red for an instant. It says as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, and Kazul's Fury deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. Also, it's an MDFC, and it has a tapped mountain on the back, basically. Not mountain exactly, but it taps for red, enters the battlefield tapped. So going back to that Unleash Fury example, double the power of target creature. If we get that up to enough to one-shot somebody and say our opponent's C is low enough for our Kazul's Fury to finish them off with a fling effect, I always like to have something like this in my back pocket, just in case somebody goes to remove my commander, still be able to do the damage so it's not wasted. Speaking of people going for our commander, I also have Undying Malice. It's 1 black for an instant. It says until end of turn, target creature gains when this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with the +1/+1 counter on it, thus making it bigger for the next time, and we'll still get the dice trigger off of our opponent's ability, so we'll be able to kill one of our opponent's artifacts or creatures, and then our commander will just come right back. So it's nice to have a couple of those effects in the deck just to protect our commander, because Voltron decks are a little fragile when it comes to removal, especially if you're in Rakdos. If you don't have blue for counter spells or stuff to protect your commander, it is a little rough if your commander dies too many times, even though our commander is pretty cheap with all the sacrifice effects. So that is pretty much it for the Balrog. I like this deck a lot. I think it's really flavorful. You know, the Balrog is one of my favorite characters from the Lord of the Rings movies. Really cool to see him get a suitably strong card such as this one. Plus that art is just amazing. So that's all I got here for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Go ahead and subscribe down below if you'd like to see more of my content. I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, take care.